sun blazed over downtown Chicago as Elijah Carter adjusted his tie outside the glass tower of Garrison Dynamics, one of the city's top engineering firms. His hands were steady, but his heart was loud. He'd rehearsed this day 1,000 times. Every answer, every technical question, even the handshake. After years of night classes, failed internships, and side hustles fixing old generators, this interview was supposed to be his moment. He glanced at his reflection in the glass. A tall black man in a second-hand suit that didn't quite fit his broad shoulders. His old professor's words echoed in his mind. "You'll have to be twice as good to get half as far." He smiled faintly. "Then I'll just have to be 3 times as good." Inside, the receptionist, a young woman with designer glasses and a corporate smile, looked him up and down. "Name?" she asked. "Elijah Carter. Interview for the structural design position." She clicked through her computer, nodded. "Take a seat. They'll call you shortly." He sat near the glass wall, watching the city buzz below. Yellow cabs, silver cars, and people in crisp suits, all part of the world he wanted to help build. He imagined bridges, towers, clean energy systems, things that lasted longer than names. A few minutes later, a tall man in a blue suit stepped out. "Mr. Carter?" Elijah stood. "Yes, sir. Follow me." The interview room was cold, modern furniture, LED lights, walls covered in 3D architectural renderings. 3 people sat on the opposite side of a polished table. Mr. Garrison, the CEO, silver hair and sharper eyes. Linda Moore, the HR director. And Brian Tate, a lead engineer with the kind of smirk that didn't hide well. "Mr. Carter," Garrison began, "I see here you graduated top of your class in civil systems at Northern Illinois?" "Yes, sir," Elijah said, careful but confident. "My thesis was on sustainable load distribution for urban bridges. Cheaper materials, longer lifespan." Tate chuckled. "Cheaper materials? Sounds like you're trying to cut corners." Elijah smiled politely. "No, sir. Trying to build smarter. The design reduces maintenance costs by 30% while increasing durability." Garrison leaned forward. "Interesting. But this company works on high-end projects. We don't experiment with untested ideas." "I understand, sir. But innovation starts with risk, controlled, calculated risk. I ran over 100 stress simulations myself." Linda raised a brow. "You did all that on your own?" "Yes, ma'am. I didn't have access to lab funding, so I built a scaled prototype in my garage." Tate laughed under his breath. "In your garage?" Elijah hesitated. "Yes, sir. With recycled steel and spare hydraulics." The room fell silent. Garrison tapped his pen, unimpressed. "Mr. Carter," he said, "we appreciate your effort, but we're looking for candidates with industry experience." Elijah nodded, fighting to stay composed. "I understand. I was hoping my work could speak for itself." Tate smirked. "Maybe it can, if we ever need a handyman." Something in Elijah's chest went cold. The words weren't loud, but they hit harder than any shout. Garrison stood. "That will be all. We'll be in touch." Elijah shook each of their hands. Firm, professional. Though he saw the dismissive glances they exchanged behind polite smiles. As he reached the door, Tate called out, "Oh, Mr. Carter?" Elijah turned. Tate grinned. "Make sure that garage of yours has good ventilation. Wouldn't want your next experiment to blow up." They laughed softly as Elijah left the room. Outside, the city's energy felt cruelly different. He walked down the steps, briefcase in hand, trying not to let the anger show. People brushed past him. Businessmen talking into phones, interns laughing, cabs honking. While he stood still for a moment, staring up at the skyline. "They don't see me," he thought. "They see what they expect me to be." His phone buzzed. It was a text from his mother. "How did it go, baby?" He typed back slowly, still waiting to hear. But the truth was he already knew. That night, Elijah returned to his small one-bedroom apartment on the south side. Blueprints covered his kitchen table, coffee-stained and weathered. He sat down, opened his laptop, and stared at the 3D model of his design. A bridge built from modular steel segments that could self-adjust under load. A design that could withstand natural disasters and require half the cost of maintenance. He whispered to himself. They laughed at Edison, too. His power flickered once, then again, the old building groaning in protest. He sighed, grabbed his tools, and went to the basement to fix it himself. When the lights came back on, a faint grin crossed his face. "Guess I'm still an engineer," he muttered. 2 weeks passed. No call, no email, no follow-up. Then, one night, as he scrolled through the news, a headline froze him. Garrison Dynamics to build new Chicago River Bridge. He clicked. The article showed 3D renderings almost identical to his prototype. Same design, same load structure, same modular system. His hands trembled. He zoomed in. Right there was his concept diagram. They'd taken his design. For a moment he couldn't breathe. Then the anger hit, slow, deep, cold. He whispered, "They laughed at my garage, but they stole my work." He closed the laptop, stood up, and looked out the window toward the glowing skyline. "All right," he said quietly. "Let's see how well they build it without the man who designed it." 3 months later, the city of Chicago buzzed with excitement. Banners hung across downtown. Garrison Dynamics unveils the future of urban infrastructure. The brand new Riverline Bridge project was the centerpiece. The mayor, city planners, and reporters all gathered to celebrate the revolutionary modular bridge design that would cut costs and change urban transport forever. At the edge of the crowd, Elijah Carter watched silently. He wasn't invited, but he didn't need a ticket to stand on the public walkway. He looked up at the massive steel structure arching over the river, identical to the model that had once sat on his kitchen table. Same load-balancing beams, same joint geometry, even the same dynamic plates that flexed under temperature change. They hadn't even bothered to alter it. His jaw clenched as he listened to Mr. Garrison give a grand speech on stage. "And with this design, our engineers have brought sustainability and innovation together, proving that Chicago leads the future." Cameras flashed. Applause thundered. Elijah whispered under his breath, "Your engineers didn't build that. They copied it." He turned to leave. There was no point in staying. But as he reached the end of the block, he saw something that stopped him cold. A hairline crack running across one of the base plates of the structure. Barely visible to anyone else, but to an engineer's eye, it was wrong. The modular joint was misaligned. They'd installed it upside down. His pulse quickened. He stepped closer, zoomed in with his phone's camera. The angle of the stress rods was backward, a mistake that could multiply under heavy load. He felt a chill crawl up his spine. They didn't understand the math. They built it wrong. That night, Elijah couldn't sleep. He sat at his desk, staring at the same simulation he'd built months ago. He adjusted the parameters, increased wind pressure, vibration frequency, traffic weight. Within seconds, the digital bridge began to fracture. The failure sequence looked horrifyingly real. He muttered, "If that stress hits during rush hour." He grabbed his phone and called the Garrison Dynamics office. A machine answered. "Thank you for contacting Garrison Dynamics. Our offices are closed for the weekend." He tried again. Same message. He sent 3 emails, detailed warnings, screenshots, calculations. No reply. By 3 a.m., he was pacing his apartment. His engineering instincts screamed louder than his exhaustion. He whispered, "If I'm wrong, I look like a fool. But if I'm right." He grabbed his keys and headed out into the night. At sunrise, he reached the bridge again. Construction crews were already prepping the official opening ceremony for the following day. The river shimmered gold in the early light, the sound of drills echoing through the air. Elijah approached the nearest foreman. "Excuse me, sir. I need to speak with your structural engineer. There's a critical alignment issue in the base joint. The man frowned. Who are you? Elijah Carter, civil systems engineer. That plate over there, if it's mounted in reverse, it'll shift under temperature expansion. The foreman shrugged. Everything passed inspection, buddy. You can call the office if you've got concerns. He turned away. Elijah sighed in frustration. They don't even know what they're standing on. The next morning, crowds filled the bridge for the official ribbon cutting. The mayor smiled for cameras. Reporters crowded the walkway, and Garrison stood proudly beside the massive ribbon. Elijah wasn't there, but he was watching from across the river, sitting in his truck, live stream pulled up on his phone. Ladies and gentlemen, Garrison's voice boomed over the mic. Chicago's future begins today. The ribbon dropped. Cheers erupted. Cars began to cross slowly for the first time. Then it happened. A low metallic groan. Barely audible at first, then louder. The camera feed on Elijah's phone shook. People screamed. The bridge began to tremble under the weight of morning traffic. Elijah froze. He could see it, the same base joint he'd warned them about, buckling under strain. Bolts popped. A support beam snapped. Panic spread like wildfire. Then, crack. A section of the lower deck split open, dumping a delivery truck's back tires halfway through. But the modular design, his design, kicked in. Even though they'd assembled it wrong, the system's self-balancing load sensors shifted weight distribution to the other beams. It didn't collapse completely. The system caught itself. The bridge held. Barely. Elijah exhaled hard, hands shaking. She's still alive. Because of me. Within hours, the news exploded. Breaking. Riverline Bridge nearly collapses during grand opening. Officials investigating design flaws at Garrison Dynamics. Video footage flooded every channel. The groaning metal. The screaming crowd. The tilted cars. Garrison Dynamics scrambled for statements. The city demanded answers. Inside their glass tower, chaos reigned. Linda, the HR director, looked pale. Sir, we've got reporters outside. They're asking if the design was tested properly. Garrison barked. Of course it was. Run the numbers again. Find the error. But Brian Tate, the same engineer who'd mocked Elijah, sat silent. He recognized the equations. He knew whose design it really was. It's not our code, he muttered quietly. Garrison snapped. What? Tate swallowed. The load equation in the blueprint file. It's not ours. It's labeled E. Carter Systems Prototype. Garrison froze. The blood drained from his face. For a long moment, the room was silent. Then softly, he said, Get him on the phone. That evening, Elijah sat at his workbench, surrounded by scattered notes and tools. The news blared from a small TV. Investigators credit innovative fail-safe design for preventing total collapse. He looked up slowly. Fail-safe design. They just described his system. Then his phone buzzed. A known number. He almost ignored it, until he saw the caller ID. Garrison Dynamics. He stared at it for a moment, then answered. This is Elijah. A pause. Then a familiar voice, quieter, humbler. Elijah, this is Richard Garrison. I believe we owe you a conversation. Elijah leaned back, heart steady. Yes, sir, he said. I believe you do. For 2 days, Elijah ignored every phone call from Garrison Dynamics. He didn't need their apology, not after the humiliation, not after the laughter. But deep down, he knew the truth. If he didn't step in, the city might still be in danger. On the 3rd day, a knock came at his apartment door. When he opened it, a sharply dressed woman in a dark suit stood outside, badge clipped to her coat. Elijah Carter? She asked. Yes. I'm Maria Ortiz, structural safety investigator, City of Chicago. The mayor's office asked me to speak with you directly. Elijah frowned. Why me? She held up a file. Inside were photos of the Riverline Bridge, fractured steel, twisted beams, sensors flashing red. Because every independent review leads back to a design tagged with your name. E. Carter Systems. He blinked. They used my work. Looks like it, she said. And now, the city wants to know what went wrong, and how to fix it before it collapses completely. Elijah's throat tightened. You're saying the bridge could still fail? Maria nodded gravely. It's stable for now, but stress fractures are spreading. If the load shifts too far, she didn't need to finish. Elijah already knew the math. 2 hours later, Elijah stood once again in the gleaming lobby of Garrison Dynamics, the same place that had made him feel invisible. Now, every employee who passed by stared at him with nervous curiosity. The receptionist who once smiled politely but dismissively now stood quickly. Mr. Carter, they're expecting you upstairs. He gave her a nod and stepped into the elevator. As the doors closed, he caught his reflection in the glass. Same man, same determination, but something was different now. He wasn't here for approval. He was here for accountability. The boardroom looked exactly as he remembered it. Spotless glass table, city skyline through the window, and the same 3 people who'd laughed at him months ago. But this time, the tone was different. Garrison rose immediately. Mr. Carter, thank you for coming. Please sit. Elijah sat calmly, setting his folder on the table. Across from him, Brian Tate shifted uneasily. His usual smirk was gone. Linda looked genuinely nervous, her hands clasped tightly. Garrison began. First, let me say on behalf of the company, we're sorry. We should have given your design the credit it deserved. Elijah raised an eyebrow. You mean the design you stole? The room went silent. Garrison sighed. You're right. There's no excuse for that. But right now, our focus must be on preventing further damage. The city's depending on us, on you. Elijah leaned forward, voice steady. Tell me exactly what you built, what you changed, and what corners you cut. Brian cleared his throat. We modified the modular base plate to reduce manufacturing costs. It shouldn't have affected performance. Elijah's jaw tightened. You inverted the orientation, didn't you? Tate froze. I thought it was symmetrical. It's not, Elijah interrupted sharply. That plate's geometry only works in one direction. You reversed the angle. That's why the stress propagated unevenly. Garrison rubbed his temple. Can it be fixed? Yes, Elijah said. But you'll need to shut down traffic and reinforce every single joint before rush hour tomorrow. And you'll need my original schematic to stabilize the load. Linda exhaled. We can do that. Just tell us what to do. Elijah looked at them. The same people who once couldn't see past his skin, his clothes, his resume, now hanging on his every word. He opened his folder, pulled out a set of detailed blueprints, and spread them across the table. This, he said, pointing to the corrected joint design, is how you stop the bridge from collapsing. For the next 3 hours, Elijah led the meeting like a commander in crisis mode. He walked them through the equations, the torque ratios, and the modular sensor thresholds. Every time Tate hesitated, Elijah explained calmly, not to humiliate, but to teach. By the end, even Garrison was scribbling notes. When they finished, Elijah looked up. You'll need crews working through the night. I'll supervise the recalibration myself. Garrison hesitated. You'll do that? After how we treated you? Elijah's eyes hardened. This isn't about you. It's about the people driving across that bridge tomorrow. They deserve better. Garrison nodded slowly. You're right. Completely right. That night, under floodlights and cold wind, Elijah stood on the Riverline Bridge again. This time in a hard hat and reflective vest. Dozens of workers followed his instructions as he guided the team through the reinforcement process. Shift the joint bracket 5 mm counterclockwise, he called. Rebalance the load sensors on section 3. Double-check the heat tension readings before we tighten that beam. The same foreman who had dismissed him weeks earlier now watched with awe. You really know your stuff, man. Elijah smiled faintly. You learn a lot fixing things no one else believes you can fix. By sunrise, they'd completed the final calibration. The bridge gleamed under the morning light, stable and strong. Elijah stood at the center, looking out over the river, exhausted, but proud. His design had held, even through sabotage and arrogance. Later that morning, Garrison held a press conference. Dozens of cameras pointed toward him as he stood behind the podium. But this time, he wasn't alone. Elijah Carter, he announced, is the engineer whose original design saved this city. Without his innovation and leadership, this structure would have failed. On behalf of Garrison Dynamics and the people of Chicago, we owe him our deepest gratitude. The crowd clapped. Cameras flashed. Elijah stepped forward, shaking Garrison's hand. Not out of forgiveness, but out of dignity. When a reporter shouted, "Mr. Carter, how does it feel to be the man who saved the city that rejected you?" He paused, then smiled slightly. "It feels good," he said. "But I didn't do it to prove anyone wrong. I did it because when something's broken, you fix it. Even if you didn't break it." The room went silent for a moment, then erupted in applause. That evening, as he packed up his tools, Garrison approached him quietly. "Elijah, the city's offering a contract to rebuild all 3 bridges using your design. We want you to lead it as chief structural engineer." Elijah looked at him for a long moment, then asked, "Why now?" Garrison met his eyes. "Because we finally realized you're not just an engineer, you're a visionary. And because we were wrong." Elijah nodded slowly. "You were. But if I take this job, things will be done my way. No shortcuts, no ego, no politics." Garrison smiled faintly. "Deal." Elijah extended his hand. "Then let's rebuild it right this time." The chaos of that night still echoed through the city, though now it wasn't fear people talked about. It was awe. Everyone wanted to know who had designed the backup structure that saved the Riverline Bridge from collapsing. News anchors said phrases like, "the miracle blueprint," and "an anonymous hero engineer." But inside Garrison Dynamics, no one had to wonder. They all knew exactly who had done it. Elijah Carter, the man they'd once dismissed as too ambitious and not the right fit. The next morning, Elijah arrived early at the office, as he always did. His steel-toe boots clicked against the polished lobby floor, leaving faint scuffs the janitors usually got blamed for. But this time, people didn't ignore him. They stopped mid-conversation. Some nodded respectfully. Others just stepped aside quietly. For the first time, they looked at him not as a diversity hire, not as the guy in the corner cubicle who never got invited to lunch, but as the man who had just saved their jobs, their company's reputation, and maybe even their city. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just walked straight to his desk and began reviewing the bridge's safety data. By noon, Mr. Garrison himself called Elijah into the boardroom. Half the executive team was already seated, including Brian Tate, who looked like he hadn't slept. "Elijah," Garrison began, his voice steady but soft, "I want to start by saying, I owe you an apology." Elijah didn't respond right away. He placed a tablet on the table open to a 3D render of the bridge design. "You don't owe me anything, sir," he said. "You owe the city a better standard." Garrison looked down, ashamed. "You were right about the structural stress distribution. We ignored it." Elijah's tone stayed calm. "You didn't ignore it. You ignored me. There's a difference." The silence that followed was heavy, sharp, honest. Brian finally spoke. "I didn't mean." "Yes, you did," Elijah interrupted gently. "You meant every word when you said I didn't fit in. But fitting in isn't what keeps bridges standing. Understanding does." No one spoke after that. Garrison exhaled slowly, stood, and walked to Elijah. "Effective immediately," he said. You're reinstated as lead structural engineer, with full authority over Riverline and all future safety projects. The city wants to meet you personally." Elijah nodded, expression unreadable. "Thank you. But if we're going to rebuild trust, we start by rebuilding who gets a seat at this table." He turned to the junior engineers watching nervously through the glass wall. "Bring them in," he told Garrison. They helped too. That afternoon, Elijah led a new kind of meeting, not the kind where the loudest person won, but where every voice mattered. He listened. He taught. He asked questions no one else had bothered to ask. When one intern hesitated to share an idea, Elijah smiled and said, "If I had stayed quiet when people doubted me, this bridge would have fallen. Don't ever silence yourself because someone else is uncomfortable." The entire room felt different, lighter, sharper, alive. 3 days later, the Chicago Tribune published a front-page story. Rejected engineer saves city bridge, redefines leadership at Garrison Dynamics. Photos showed Elijah standing beside the repaired structure, blueprints rolled under one arm. The caption read, "Elijah Carter, 34, designed the modular fail-safe system that prevented the Riverline Bridge collapse, a system his employers had rejected 2 years prior." The story spread fast. Morning shows called. Universities wanted him to lecture. But Elijah declined most invitations. He wasn't chasing recognition, he was building something else. Late one evening, Brian knocked on his office door. "Elijah," he said quietly, "you've got the city council meeting tomorrow. They're naming a scholarship in your honor." Elijah didn't look up from his notes. "I didn't do it for that." "I know," Brian said, almost whispering. "But you earned it anyway." He hesitated, then added, "I wish I'd seen your worth sooner." Elijah finally looked up. "It's not about me, Brian. It's about what happens next time someone walks in here with a different voice, a different face, a different idea. You don't have to see their worth immediately. You just have to not bury it." Brian nodded, humbled, and left the office quietly. When Elijah stepped out later that night, the wind off the river was cold but clean. He paused on the bridge, watching cars glide over his design. A living, breathing proof of persistence. The same city that once doubted him now rested safely on his calculations. He whispered softly, almost to himself, "Funny, they said my plans wouldn't hold weight. But here they are, holding up everything that matters." Then he turned and walked back toward the city lights, his reflection stretching across the water. Strong, steady, unshaken. The morning sun spilled across the skyline, glinting off the silver arches of the Riverline Bridge. Traffic flowed smoothly, unaware that just months ago, the entire structure had been one cracked beam away from disaster. The city moved on, but for Elijah Carter, nothing about this moment felt ordinary. He stood near the center of the bridge, wearing a hard hat and a simple gray jacket. Cars rushed past, their wind brushing against him. He smiled softly to himself. The hum of engines, the vibration under his boots, it wasn't just noise. It was proof that he had built something that lasted. Behind him, a city inspector approached. "Mr. Carter, the final stress tests all came back perfect. 0 deviation." Elijah nodded. "Good. That bridge isn't just metal. It's people's faith in what's possible." The inspector smiled, shook his hand, and left. Elijah lingered, his reflection caught in the river's shimmer. For the first time in years, he felt peace. 2 weeks later, he was seated at the annual Engineering Excellence Awards. The ballroom glowed with chandeliers, filled with the city's most influential architects, designers, and builders. When his name was announced, for outstanding civic contribution and structural innovation, Mr. Elijah Carter, the entire room rose in applause. He walked onto the stage, not with arrogance, but quiet composure. The mayor handed him the award and whispered, "You saved our city." "Thank you." Elijah stepped up to the microphone. "When I designed that bridge," he said, No one believed it would work. Not because of the math, not because of the materials, but because of who designed it. The audience fell silent. I wasn't supposed to be in that boardroom. I wasn't supposed to be an engineer. People looked at me and saw a background, not potential. But bridges aren't built by the people the world expects. They're built by the ones who refuse to stop believing in their work. He looked out across the room. The same executives who had laughed at him months earlier now stood, clapping until their hands turned red. After the ceremony, Brian Tate approached him. The same man who had stolen credit for his work now looked humbled, nervous even. "Elijah," Brian said quietly, "I don't know how to say this right, but I'm sorry. For everything." Elijah turned to him, his expression calm. "You don't owe me words, Brian. You owe yourself change. If you ever get another chance to recognize someone's worth, don't hesitate next time." Brian nodded, voice low. "I won't. I promise." Elijah extended a hand. They shook. A simple gesture that meant something deeper than forgiveness. It meant understanding. Months passed. Elijah's name began to circulate in universities, design panels, and leadership conferences. Reporters called him the man who rebuilt the city's trust. He never chased fame. Instead, he opened a small engineering firm on the south side. A quiet brick building with a clean sign above the door. Carter Structural Solutions, building what they said couldn't be built. Inside, he mentored young engineers, some fresh out of college, others from trade schools or overlooked neighborhoods. He gave them the opportunities he never had. One day, a young intern asked him, "Mr. Carter, why do you always hire people nobody else picks?" Elijah smiled. "Because those are the ones who work twice as hard to prove they belong. That's the kind of foundation you can build a whole city on." He looked out the office window where the Riverline Bridge glowed in the distance. "You see that?" he asked. "That bridge didn't just hold up steel. It held up people's belief that we're more than what they think we are." A few months later, Elijah stood again by the river, this time during daylight. Tourists took pictures of the famous bridge that the city's forgotten engineer had saved. He leaned on the railing, eyes reflecting the bright blue sky. Footsteps approached. It was Mr. Garrison. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Garrison said quietly. "Perfect," Elijah replied. Garrison nodded. "The city council approved your proposal. You'll be leading the new Southline expansion. 3 bridges, all under your name." Elijah smiled faintly. "I appreciate it. But we're not just building bridges, Mr. Garrison. We're rebuilding how people treat the ones who build them." Garrison looked at him with respect. "You've changed this company more than I ever could." Elijah shook his head. "No, the truth changed it. I just gave it a voice." That evening, Elijah locked up his small office. As he stepped outside, the golden light of sunset spilled across the street. The city skyline shimmered in the distance. Alive, strong, supported by the same man they once called not a fit. He looked down at his hands, rough, scarred, steady. The hands of a man who had been doubted, dismissed, and ignored, yet built something unbreakable. He whispered softly, "Funny thing about bridges. They're built by people the world walks over, and they stand because someone refused to fall." Then he smiled, slid his hands into his pockets, and walked toward the horizon, where the glow of the city met the sky.